Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story TV and the Her Story podcast. This is Gertrude Butcher here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our show. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me today. My name is Tia Delano. I'm located on the East Coast of the United States, right in it's called the DMV region, DC, Maryland, Virginia. I'm on the Virginia side of things. I am 35 years old, and I have a story that I never thought I would tell. I woke up one day and literally could not get out of bed. And I was surprised because at that time I was in my very early 30s and I just couldn't move. This was about 5 years ago and things were looking very grim. I started to go to the doctor more and more, trying to figure out what was happening with me. And it turns out this was something that had been going on for years. It took a couple of weeks of very persistent doctor visits, ER visits, and the like, because not only was I finding it hard to get out of bed and walk even to the restroom, but I was struggling with all of my daily functions. And it got to the point where I couldn't even write a page in my journal. And for those that know me, if I can't write in my journal, I can't even think straight. So what happened was I was eventually diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And it was a devastating diagnosis for sure. I had no one close to me who had experienced this. My family was fairly healthy. And all of a sudden, I was completely sidelined, nearly a year out of work, lots and lots of doctor's visits and therapist visits as far as physical therapy and medication. And it was such a difficult period. And nobody understands just how hard it is to live through something like that unless they're living through it or they're partnered with someone who's living through it, a good friend or a spouse or even their children. Unless you've been through that, there's nothing like it. So it was a devastating diagnosis because, of course, the first thing they tell you is there's no cure. You just manage the symptoms. So that led to me spending about a year and a half, 2 years doing deep work when I did have the energy to do it and uprooting so many things and totally renovating my interior life as far as my health, my social circle, my habits. I had to look at everything to figure out what was contributing to my discomfort. And things slowly started to get better. But what I found out at the core of it was I was doing too much. I had spent nearly a decade commuting back and forth to my office, spending at least 3.5 hours on the road on any given day. And yes, I split the driving up with a carpool/van pool of people, but it was still very, very difficult. I was disregarding the pain of going through a divorce that had happened just about a year before my diagnosis. And I was raising a child from that marriage. So it was a lot loaded on me. I had divorce, I had physical problems, I had the stresses of daily life, I had a ridiculously long commute, and I did not know where to go and what to do to start working on my issues to improve my health. So throughout this process, I still had to live, of course. My daughter still needed a mom, and I really did change my entire life. I took off the year from work. Very difficult year because I didn't have my income coming in. I was very well supported by family, which was wonderful. But at the same time, I still had to figure out some things. I owned a home at the time, so I still had a mortgage. I still had to make sure that my daughter was getting back and forth to her homeschooling pod. I had to make sure that I looked at what I was taking in. And at the time, I was eating as well as I could, taking tons of supplements, and the process was very slow. But one thing that really turned around my path was sitting down and getting very clear on my core values. And it doesn't sound like it's really related because I'm talking about something very physical happening in my body versus something intangible. But when I sat down and looked at my core values, when I finally had enough strength to do so, I realized a lot of the imbalance was coming from living out of harmony with my values. I knew what made sense to me, what mattered to me. And one of my values was rest, and I wasn't doing that. Another value was success, and I was pushing so hard with that that I wasn't balancing all the other values that I had going on. So it was a very difficult, tremendously difficult years leading up to this. But then when I finally sat down and went through my values, I realized there's a lot of things, there are a lot that I can cancel out. Many things I was doing didn't even matter and didn't improve my health. In fact, took away from it. So once I was very clear on that, I started doing my own work. I started to make sure, yes, taking care of the physical, staying on top of my supplements, getting as much rest as I could, which is very difficult with fibromyalgia for those that have it. If you get 3 to 4 hours of consecutive hours of sleep a night, you're doing great. So I had to get from that point to sleeping all night so that I could have the kind of rest I needed. I had to figure out things with my work again because I had to come back to work after not doing my job for many months and try to remember what I'm there for. So it was extremely. It could have been a lot easier if I had more resources at the beginning of this journey, but I didn't. So I had to figure out how to get my resources as I went along the path. And what I figured out over time was that, yes, the resources that were there were worth exploring, but it's kind of a needle in a haystack thing where you are looking at one resource that might address one thing, but it's not comprehensive enough. So it took a while. It took a while of self-study and self-mastery, as well as trying the things that were recommended in order to figure out what it was I needed to be at my best health and to live the kind of life I desired. So I started, of course, with my values. I did the things that I was supposed to do as far as physical health, going to the physical therapist, going to the doctor's appointments, taking the supplements, trying to get the rest. But I also started to feed my mind and spirit in different ways, finding practices that really supported me beyond the physical level. And once I had some of those practices under my belt, just remembering to meditate, to spend time in nature, even if I wasn't really doing anything, just to stand outside and let the sun hit my face. Those kind of things really made a difference and improved the quality of my life so much. And it's something that we often take for granted. We just think, of course, you're going to take care of yourself. Of course, you're going to do these sort of things. But if you're not clear on who you are and what's important to you, you might do the things that would feed someone else's soul, and your soul is starving. You're not giving yourself what you need while you are trying to chase after someone else's ideal of what it takes to feel whole and healthy and happy. So in the past year, my life has completely changed. Of course, I've been back at work since 2020, so that hasn't changed much. I got back into the swing of things over the past 3 years. But from 2018, when I first couldn't even write a page in my journal and couldn't get out of the bed, from there to now, I've been traveling. I've been able to walk all over Portugal and Spain and Greece. And, I've looked at my step counter and I'm amazed because I was someone who was doing great to get 1,500 steps. And here I am logging 17,000, 20,000 in a day and not feeling absolutely depleted. So it was an amazing journey, mainly because I figured out what actually mattered to me and leaned into those things. And I stopped leaning on the things that really didn't matter, or that maybe they matter, but they don't show up in the way that suits me best. So I got really clear on what that looked like, leaned into it, supported myself with as many resources as I could that fed those different core values that I have, and went from there. It was such a wild experience. I can't express enough how difficult it is when you have a condition like fibromyalgia. I couldn't even hug my daughter without bracing myself because it physically hurt for her to hug me. I'd cry at the drop of a hat because I was so uncomfortable. Most days at the beginning of this process, I could, like I said, barely getting out of bed, couldn't get out of bed some days. And if I got into the shower and ate a meal, that would take all of my energy for 5 and 6 hours. All I could do was just lay down afterward and hope that I feel better and well enough in a little while to get up and do something else. So it was so difficult. I thought I was dying, quite literally. I thought I was dying. And it was the support came, of course, after my diagnosis because no one in my family really knew what to do at that point. They just knew that I wasn't feeling well, and they couldn't really help me. They didn't really understand once I was clear on what was happening. Then they knew how they could fill the gaps a bit for me, and I was able to tell them. But it still was just a very challenging few years. And it started years before in smaller ways. And I suspect that stress and overwhelm really accelerated how devastating that month in 2018, where everything changed around. I think that those things fed into it, but it was always in the background for quite a few years. I just was able to balance it a little better. So once I was able to take better care of myself over these past few years, I'm not on any more medication. I'm finally able to rest like I need to. My body is functioning pretty normally. Still have flares from time to time, but they're nowhere near as devastating as they were when I first started on this journey. And I finally feel like I have myself back, because one of the parts of fibromyalgia that people who suffer from it really don't have time to mention. They focus so much on how their body feels. They never tell you one of the most devastating things, at least for me, was brain fog. I would wake up and I couldn't remember the day before. And that might be normal when you're much older, but as someone in their very early 30s at the time, I didn't know what to make of that. And I was trying to figure out, what does this mean? Why can't I remember the day before? Why can't I remember what I did a few hours ago? Even if I'm just laying here, what did I look at a few hours ago? It makes you feel like you're losing your mind. And that's the last thing you want to go. Even if everything else goes, you want your mind. And to not even be able to rely upon that was scary. And so to be able to now think clearly, to know exactly what I did a few hours ago, and I still need a little support with that a bit, but to know what I did a few hours ago and to know what I did a couple of weeks and a couple of years ago is such a relief. It doesn't feel like I've lost my memories. I still have my memories and I can recall things so much easier. So that brain fog part, like I said, a lot of times people don't discuss it, but for me, that was one of the toughest things. And to have that almost fully restored has been the greatest gift. So, yeah, that is my story. I suffered through a lot of physical issues for several years and dug up from it finally. And now I'm on the other side and feeling so much better. And it came from tapping into my core and my core values and what really mattered to me.
Tia, you went through a lot, and what you are describing is more common than uncommon. Sometimes a lot of women don't know they have this condition. Can you share with us a few of the symptoms that you felt?
Absolutely. One of the biggest ones is fatigue, and it gets downplayed a lot, of course, especially if you're a woman and especially if you're a mom and a working mom. Most people say, of course, you're tired. But it is not just tired, it is fatigue where you sleep and you don't feel rested. Another thing is muscular aches and pains. You just hurt and you really can't describe why. You just feel this achiness that isn't. Um, Specific to one region. It can be a sharp ache, but it's usually like a dull ache all over, as if you had the flu. And that's what I kept going back to the doctor for. I kept thinking I had the flu. So if you think of all the symptoms of the flu, dizziness, nausea, I had those: dizziness, nausea, extreme fatigue, muscle aches and pains, headaches, even night sweats a bit. I had all of those. And sometimes I tested positive for the flu, and then other times I didn't, and they really couldn't tell me anything until I kept going and kept going. And then I got to a rheumatologist who finally confirmed, yes, this is what it is.
Thank you for sharing that. It
Mhm.
must be really frustrating because you know your body, you know what's wrong, you know when you're not feeling well, and when people don't understand, it must be very, very frustrating. Now, tell me, what are the things that you changed to get yourself back on your feet?
The first thing was I had to prioritize resting, and not just any kind of rest, but deep rest. Even if it was challenging, I had to say, let me close my eyes, let me just rest as much as possible, which is one of my core values. Another thing that I had to do, I dug into as much research as my brain could handle, as foggy as it was, as much research as I could handle regarding supplements that support your body when you're going through something specifically like this. Most people think it's a musculoskeletal issue. It's not, it's neurological. It's something going on with how your brain is processing pain, and your body is getting the wrong signals from the brain, basically. So you have to figure out, how can I support my brain in being healthy? How can I support my body in being as healthy as possible? And what I found was that getting deep into my nutrition, lots and lots of supplements, lots of water, gentle movement, all of that. You really have to start from square one. I was somebody before this, I was in the gym 4 or 5 days a week, and I'd work out an hour, hour and a half, depending on how much time I had. That was what my routine was before I got sick. So it wasn't that my body wasn't being utilized. I was moving, I was active, but it was getting harder and harder. And then eventually I had to start off very simply. I did aquatic therapy for a while, where I would get into a warm pool and move gently in order to just get my body back into motion, because the diagnosis and the symptoms sidelined me for so long.
Wow. And what about your diet? Did you find that there's anything specific that you've changed that you were eating, cutting out certain foods? I've heard that sometimes eating red meat causes inflammation. Did you change your diet?
You know what? I didn't change it much in the way that I did make changes, but I didn't change it in the typical way. I was pescatarian before, so pretty much no chicken, definitely no red meat, and some seafood. And what I did change about it was that I did add more protein back into my diet, and that didn't seem to harm me. So I did add more protein. I looked at more plant based protein, and I looked at it more seriously instead of just relying on fish or shrimp. Never got really fully back into red meat, but I didn't restrict myself. I still don't eat it very often. Um, for me, the biggest thing as far as dietary changes was to make sure that I was taking fiber supplements, to make sure that I was digesting my food, the food was being eliminated properly, making sure that was the case. And I did add a lot of ginger to my food because nausea was one of my symptoms, and ginger helps with that. I did also add herbal teas into my repertoire. So I started to drink those herbal teas to support my body as well.
Wow, that's just amazing. Now, is there any explanation as to why you got it or how you got it? Do you think that the traumatic emotional stress you were under had something to do with it?
I think it exacerbated a slightly more dormant condition. So, years prior, I had contracted mono from a cruise that I went on. And so I went on this cruise. I had a great time, but I didn't get it the typical way. I didn't kiss anybody to get mono. I ended up getting it, I think, through maybe some silverware, or maybe I touched something, and I ended up contracting mono from this cruise. And here we are years later after the cruise, and I still have symptoms. And I had gotten tested for mono several times after that because the symptoms came back. And it's very rare that it reactivates, but it did indeed reactivate at least once. So that was something that kind of compromised my immune system and how my body processes things. There are studies that show a link between Epstein-Barr virus, the virus behind mononucleosis, and between fibromyalgia and it. So there is a connection there. Scientists aren't 100% clear on how that works, but there have been studies done on it because a lot of people had the condition, the mono, in their youth or whenever. And then as adults, they ended up being diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and they say there might be a link there.
That's very interesting. Now, if you could give advice to that younger woman who was struggling, not knowing how to get back on her feet, feeling unwell, let's just say there's a woman who's listening to us right now and she says, "Those are my symptoms." What three nuggets of wisdom could you give her so she could get better? Or what would you have wanted somebody to have said to you at that time?
First thing I would tell her, she's not imagining it. She's not crazy. This is real. There is a lot that's not known about it, but what we do know, we can work with. And so you're not crazy. You're not losing your mind. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is start immediately taking care of your physical body. Even if you're taking great care of it, do even better. If you're taking supplements, find some more to take, rest harder, get more rest, drink as much water as normal and healthy for your weight. Be clear, you might not be drinking enough water for your weight. 8 glasses of water a day doesn't work for everyone. So get the right amount of water for you. So taking care of that physical body is the second thing. And the third thing is get back to your core, understand who you are, and find out how you've strayed from that, because that's probably a factor as well. What are you out of balance with? Try to bring it back in balance. It's a lot, and it's a lot to do with all of this, but certainly that would be the main three things. And reach out for help. That'll be a bonus fourth thing. Reach out for help. There are a lot of resources out there.
Now, you had some family support as you were going through all of this. So you were very, very fortunate. What about that person who doesn't have any family around them? Are there any resources? What can be done?
Absolutely. One of the hard things, especially if you are pre-diagnosis, is getting someone to advocate for you. I did have a pretty good background in that, from my own mother, who showed me how to advocate for myself. But if you don't have that, the next best thing I could recommend is to find a support group online. If you've got internet access, get to a support group and put up your first post asking if there's anyone in your area, and talk to them. You have to ask. Many people who have this condition are very aware that it's still isolating, even if you have a lot of support, because it's very hard to describe the physical pain even to your loved ones. So certainly ask people for help and reach out to them. Make sure that the people in those support groups know you're there and that you're looking for some support with that. And they've been wonderful. I've been in a few groups, even as someone who's really well supported. I've been in a few groups, and it's been an invaluable experience.
I really love that. Now, you've written several books and you're working on another book. Tell us about your publications, your books. What can we expect from you?
Yes, I did two books. I've published two books over the past several years. The first one was a how to manual. So I described how to get college credits at a discount by doing the test for credit option. And that was just something that I had been working on for years prior to my diagnosis, where I wanted to share with people how I was able to shorten my time with getting my degree by paying for tests that took care of the lower level credits. The other book that I've already published is about using your senses, your five senses, to create the life you want. And I loved doing that, especially during my healing process. That was something that talked to one of my, or spoke to one of my core values, which is sensuality, not in the seductive sense, but sensuality as being immersed in my senses. That is a core value of mine. So using my senses, leveraging those to heal my body was a big thing. Envisioning how I would feel or how my life would look if I was feeling 100% better, what things I would taste when I'm feeling better, what kind of foods am I eating as a well person, what kind of scents am I smelling as a well person, and immersing myself in that as much as possible. And so that's the second book is called Come to Your Senses. The third book will be talking about my journey through fibromyalgia and things that I use to support myself, as well as not just the physical side of it, but again, the intangible side, what it's like to heal yourself on the core level, what it's like to heal your spirit and to nurture yourself so that healing can be possible, because you could heal the physical side as much as you want, but if the mindset is still traumatized, you might find yourself back into those painful situations again, back into a compromised health state again. So it's really important to get everything on board at the same time.
Wow, you have been on quite a journey. So now let's have a little thought experiment. And
Okay.
I'm going to teleport you into the future.
Okay.
And you're now 100 years old, sitting in your rocking chair, surrounded by your children, your grandchildren, your dogs, your cats, whoever is there with you at that time.
Yes.
If I could teleport you into the future to have a conversation with the future you,
Mhm.
based on what life has taught you and how you're living your life, what would you say to this amazing woman who's led you to that point?
So I would say my younger self would say to that woman in the rocking chair, you are better equipped, or you were better equipped than you ever gave yourself credit for. You were more prepared than you ever gave yourself credit for. And I would thank her for continuing to bring that prepared self to every situation so that she could make it to 100. I tell her, yes, you were always more prepared. And up until this day, I realized that. And I'm imagining me telling her that. She'll probably say, yeah, I know. But I would say, I love that you were able to use that preparation to build this beautiful family and this beautiful legacy, this legacy of wellness, of care and self care specifically, but just care in general. And I would tell her, I'm so happy I was able to lay the groundwork for that now.
The reason why I love asking women that question is that sometimes we forget that
Mhm.
that wise woman is already in us.
Yeah,
She's
that's
already
true.
here.
Mhm.
And like you, I do a lot of visualization. I play a lot in my future. And when I struggle with things, I go into my meditation and prayers and I ask her, what is the next step?
Mhm.
And I wake up with these light bulb moments, these knowings. I'm like, where did that come from?
Mhm.
But
Absolutely.
we do have all the answers.
Mhm.
Wow.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. That's a great point too. Asking my future self, what do I need to do next? I love that.
Fantastic. Tia, it was such an absolute pleasure talking to you today.
Yes,
Thank you
same
so
here.
much for coming to grace us with your story, your presence, your knowledge. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Her Story Circle movement is attracting some phenomenal women from all over the world. I'm going to try and persuade Tia to be one of our speakers at our next Washington, D.C. or Virginia, West Virginia conferences. So tune in again tomorrow, everybody. We'll interview another amazing woman. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And bye for now. Thanks again, Tia.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story.